Emotionally mature children are often praised. They are described as thoughtful, calm, responsible, and easy to handle. Adults may say they are wise beyond their years, old souls, or unusually perceptive. Compared to other children, they seem less reactive, more composed, and more capable of understanding situations that feel complex or emotionally charged. On the surface, this looks like an advantage. And in many ways, it is. But when someone was consistently described as mature for their age, there is often a deeper explanation that has little to do with natural temperament and much more to do with adaptation. Being mature early is rarely random. Maturity in childhood usually develops in response to something. It forms when emotional awareness, self-control, or responsibility becomes useful earlier than it normally would. Not because a child consciously decides to grow up faster, but because the environment quietly rewards it. In emotionally stable environments, children are allowed to be immature. They can be reactive, dependent, inconsistent, and openly expressive. Their emotions are contained by adults who have the capacity to regulate, guide, and absorb them. Over time, the child gradually develops emotional regulation through experience and support. But in other environments, that containment is inconsistent. Sometimes adults are overwhelmed, distracted, emotionally unavailable, or preoccupied with their own stress. Sometimes they rely on the child to be reasonable, understanding, or low maintenance. Sometimes emotional expression is met with impatience, dismissal, or silence rather than guidance. In these conditions, maturity becomes adaptive. The child learns, often without being taught, that emotional restraint is safer than emotional expression. That understanding others is more useful than being understood. That managing their own reactions keeps things smoother and more predictable. So the child becomes observant. They notice shifts in mood. They learn when to speak and when to stay quiet. They sense when support is available and when it is not. They adjust themselves accordingly. Over time, this looks like maturity, but internally, it is vigilance. Being mature for your age often means you learned early how to read the room. You became skilled at anticipating needs, de-escalating tension, and avoiding emotional disruption. You understood adult dynamics before you were emotionally equipped to process them. This is not because you were gifted with unusual insight. It is because insight became necessary. When a child learns that being emotionally reactive creates problems, they often move in the opposite direction. They become controlled, thoughtful, reasonable. They think before they feel, or they learn to feel quietly. This creates a child who appears unusually composed. Adults may praise this without realizing what it costs. Early maturity often comes with early responsibility. Sometimes that responsibility is explicit, like caring for siblings or mediating conflict. Other times it is subtle, like sensing when not to add to the emotional load of the household. In both cases, the child learns that their internal state has consequences beyond themselves, so they contain it. As this pattern continues, emotional self-regulation becomes internalized. The child stops expecting external support and begins providing it for themselves. They learn to calm down alone, to rationalize their feelings, to minimize distress rather than seek comfort. By adulthood, this feels normal. You may not experience yourself as someone who lacked support. You may simply experience yourself as independent, capable, and emotionally controlled. You know how to manage difficult situations. You can stay composed when others become overwhelmed. You are often the one people rely on. But there is often a hidden cost to this early maturity. When you grow up managing yourself emotionally, you may struggle to recognize when you need help, not because you believe you should not need it, but because the signal to seek it never fully developed. Support feels optional rather than necessary. Vulnerability feels inefficient rather than comforting. You may find it easier to give support than to receive it. You may be the listener, the stabilizer, the one who understands. You may notice that others confide in you easily, while you rarely do the same. When you share, you may share insights rather than raw emotion. You explain how you feel instead of letting yourself feel it openly. This is not emotional avoidance. It is emotional containment. People who were mature for their age often learn to process emotions cognitively rather than relationally. They understand their feelings, but they do not automatically externalize them. Expression happens after regulation, not during it. This can create a sense of internal solitude. You may feel deeply, but privately. You may experience stress or sadness without outward signs. Others may assume you are fine because you appear composed. Over time, you may even assume the same about yourself. Another consequence of early maturity is delayed self-attunement. When you spend childhood attuned to others, you may grow up less practiced at noticing your own needs in real time. You can read others accurately, but your own emotional signals may register later, once they are already intense or exhausting. This contributes to a particular kind of fatigue. Not the dramatic burnout associated with overload, but a quiet tiredness that accumulates from constant self-management, from holding yourself together without interruption, from rarely allowing emotional states to move outward. People who were mature for their age often struggle with rest. Even when nothing is required of them, their mind remains alert. Emotional monitoring became habitual, and habits persist long after the original conditions change. This is why relaxation can feel strangely uncomfortable. When you have learned to stay regulated through vigilance, letting go can feel disorienting. You may feel uneasy when you are not managing something. Calm without structure may feel unfamiliar. This does not mean you are anxious by nature. It means your nervous system learned that awareness equals safety. It is important to say what early maturity does not mean. It does not mean your caregivers failed you. Many adults do the best they can with the resources they have. It does not mean you experienced overt trauma. It does not mean your personality is damaged or incomplete. And it does not mean your maturity was fake. It was real. It was functional. It worked. The issue is not that you developed this trait. It is that it may have become invisible to you. When maturity becomes identity, you may not notice when you are carrying more than necessary. You may default to handling things alone, even when support is available. You may feel uncomfortable being seen in moments of uncertainty, not because you fear judgment, but because uncertainty was not something you were allowed to express early on. Understanding this pattern is not about undoing your strengths. It is about adding flexibility. Early maturity gave you emotional insight, self-control, and resilience. Awareness allows you to choose when those traits are useful and when they are simply habitual. It allows you to recognize that needing support now does not invalidate how capable you have always been. You can remain thoughtful without being silencing. You can remain composed without being alone in it. If you were described as mature for your age, it likely means you learned early how to manage yourself in an environment that needed you too. That adaptation stayed with you because it worked. Seeing it clearly does not take anything away. It simply gives you the option to grow in directions that were not available to you then.